Thanks, guys.
They can read it.
Yeah. Well, at least I can't see them.
So, welcome to the Hollidaysburg Area School District Board Forum. We would like to thank all the candidates for participating in this event, along with Dr. Gilday, Dr. Letcher, Mr. Harrington, Mr. Rollins, and all the students and staff that made this event possible. I would also like to recognize myself, Kyle Gokenauer, Mia Lacrone, and Natalie Nagel for mediating the forum.
Today, we will be asking candidates running for the school board questions concerning their outlooks on school safety, student wellness, curriculum, building improvements, and taxes. These questions came from students, parents, and district employees.
Each candidate will have a 1-minute, 30-second opening statement and approximately 45 seconds to give their opinion on each question at hand. Each candidate will then have a 1-minute, 30-second closing statement to sum up their views. At this time, please give a round of applause for all of the candidates. From this point forward, please hold all applause until the end of the forum. For respect of all of the candidates, please remain silent with cell phones turned off. This event will be live streamed on YouTube for all who cannot be here today. Thank you again.
We will now begin with opening statements.
Good afternoon. My name is Lanna Frye, and I'm seeking re-election to the Hollidaysburg Area School Board. A little bit about myself: I was born and raised and still reside in the borough. I'm a proud graduate of Hollidaysburg High School, and I'm also a parent of a Hollidaysburg graduate. For the past 4 years, it's been my privilege to serve on Hollidaysburg School Board. In that time, I've learned about budgets and investments, policies and procedures, committee work, school codes, capital expenditures, and mandates. I've made it a priority to attend meetings, be diligent in preparation, to ask questions, and to commit the time and effort necessary to understand the issues and to be informed. It may be cliche, but I love our district and I love our community. Critical to serving as a productive board member is being ever mindful that you've been elected to represent your community. Equally critical is approaching the position with a sense of professionalism and respect for all, absent of personal agendas and political grandstanding. Personal agendas get in the way of being able to evaluate objectively and make good decisions. The work of a school board should not be political. It should be about preparing and propelling our students, protecting taxpayers, equipping teachers, and continuing to build on the long-standing excellence of the Hollidaysburg Area School District. This election is critical. Who you vote for matters. Your vote will impact the future of our district and our community. Thank you.
For his opening statement.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today, and I'd also like to applaud the students of the Honors Civics class along with Mr. Rollins for putting together today's forum. So I keep getting asked, why are you running for school board? Are you crazy? You were a teacher yourself, so you'll be for all the teachers. Given your background in technology, you're going to push for tons of technology. I also hear I have an agenda and a conflict of interest. So first of all, I'd like to say I'm not crazy. My mother had me tested. The rest of the statements do hold some truth. I am for supporting the teachers by giving them the resources they need to provide a quality, well-rounded education for the students of this district, and by giving them the respect they deserve as professionals. When it comes to technology, sure, it plays a big role in education, but it's not the be-all and end-all of a well-rounded education. With my experience, I will be able to make educated decisions when technology proposals come before the board. Now the big one. Yes, I do have an agenda. It is to provide a well-rounded, high-quality education for all the students in an environment where they feel safe while being fiscally responsible with the taxpayers' dollars. I will make you one promise. Before I make any decision as a board member, I will look at everything on the table, do my homework based on reliable and credible information, and take into account the impact my decisions have on the community, our teachers, and our students, and then finally make a decision.
Thank you. We will now have Doug give his opening statement.
Good afternoon. I would also like to thank Mr. Rollins and the students of the Honors Civics class for hosting this important event today. I just want to share briefly that I feel my best qualification for being on the school board is the fact that I'm a father of 4 children who currently attend school in the district, and so I believe I have a vested interest in doing what's best for students. I also believe my experience as a small business owner would be an asset to the board and to the school district in general. I've done that for the past 14 years. And I've also lived in the community for the past nearly 25 years. I'm proud to be a resident of Hollidaysburg and look forward, if you are willing to give me your vote on November 5th, to having the opportunity to serve the community and give back to this great environment that's done so much for me and my family for the last 25 years. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now have Tom give his opening statement.
I thank you all for coming today, and I commend the Honors Civics class and their teacher, Mike Rollins, for making this possible. I applaud the other candidates here who are willing to be accountable and face the important questions that will be posed by these students today. The voters have an important decision to make, and forums such as this help the members of the community to make that decision with the best possible information. For 30 years, I had a dream of being a special education teacher. During that time, I ran a few businesses, I had a career as a wholesale food broker, and I raised 2 children who were fortunate to attend school in Hollidaysburg. I always had a need to be active within my community, and I found myself coaching multiple sports such as swimming, girls softball, and wrestling. I helped build the Legion Play Park and the All Abilities Playground at C.W. Longer. As much as I enjoyed those activities, there was still that dream of working with children with emotional behavioral challenges. In 2002, I quit my job and enrolled in graduate school at Penn State University, earning a master's degree in special education. Upon graduation, I was immediately hired by the Hollidaysburg Area School Board. It was the best job that I ever had. I will be forever thankful for the Hollidaysburg Area School Board for approving the hire of a 48-year-old non-traditional candidate for a teaching position. If I am elected to the board, it will be my opportunity to pay back this community back.
Thank you. We will now have Ken read his opening statement. Mr. Snyder. Sorry.
Don't know all the people on the board. I have met a few. I met Rick Gallagher, Lois Kanashiki. I've met Dr. Gilday, Assistant Superintendent Elder. Phil Smith, who's retired, I guess, now as buildings keeper. Good people. And I don't particularly think that Hollidaysburg School District is in shambles and that you need somebody to come in and just revamp everything and get it all straightened out. Actually, it's doing quite well. I'm pretty proud of the district. I graduated from this district in 1965. And it was a good time in school. I do commend you, as my fellow panel members have done, for your interest. I would have one desire. This auditorium ought to be full with the number of folks that we have in our district, and I would hope that the increase in interest would really be there. Again, I'm Ken Snyder, and thanks for your time.
Thank you. We will now have Brandon give his opening statement.
Hello, everyone. I'm Brandon Burns. I want to thank Mr. Rollins and the Honors Civics class for putting this event on. I know it's a lot of work, and I appreciate your efforts. Also want to thank all of you for being here. My wife and I, Becky, moved here 11 years ago. And when we were getting ready to move, at the time I worked in Roaring Spring, my wife worked in Bedford. And so we had a lot of opportunity to live in many different school districts. I actually counted 8 different school districts we could live in. And we chose Hollidaysburg. And the reason we chose Hollidaysburg is for the strength of the community, the school district, the reputation. and I want to uphold that reputation. Over the last 11 years, I've grown to love this community, and I believe that if you love a community and you live in that community, you need to participate in the community. So that's why I've chosen to run for school board. I won't make any grand promises. People keep asking me about, what do you want to accomplish? Why sign up to be on the school board? And I keep telling them the same answer. It's not about me, right? It's about the people that I would represent on the board. I want to listen to students, to parents, administrators, and other community members, taxpayers like myself, and do the best to serve all those people well. So I appreciate your vote on November 5th.
Thank you. We will now have Mrs. Kanashiki give her opening statement.
Thank you. I'm Lois Kanashiki. I take my job as school director very seriously. I know local families who have pulled their children out of our schools and sent them halfway across the state to boarding schools because we weren't meeting their needs. Most families do not have options other than public schools. We spend over $14,000 of taxpayer money per student in our district every year on education. That money should buy a world-class education. We must do better. Many students are going to college and having to retake high school level math and English at college tuition costs. I promise you I will work to get this information, which is currently available but not provided to us, so we know how many, if any, of our students are falling into this category. We just approved the several new STEM courses in our district without requiring certain achievement in math as a prerequisite. This is a mistake. It is highly likely that students will not be successful in STEM fields without high achievement in high school math. We should be cleaning up our math houses we already have before building more STEM buildings. Our job is to require the data we need to give our administration informed directives on how to prioritize resources in our district. Without that data, we are only guessing. That's no way to run a district. Thank you.
Thank you for all the candidates for giving their opening statements, and we will begin today's forum with the topic of safety. In the event of a security incident, do you feel it is necessary to have a school resource officer permanently assigned to each building, including every elementary school? Giving their answer first will be Tim.
Before I came to this forum, I spoke to the lead security resource officer, and that was one of the things that he said that they were working on, and I definitely agree we should have one in each building.
Next, Doug, please.
Thank you. I too support the decision to get us to the point where we have a resource officer available full-time in all 5 district buildings. As I understand it now, the 3 elementary buildings share 2 different officers, and they rotate their schedule, to keep our students safe. But I think, in the interest of what's best for all of our students, it is imperative that we soon get to that point where we have a full-time officer in each of the 5 district buildings.
Thank you. Tom?
57% of students report that they fear being involved in a school shooting. It is detrimental to learning when you feel that your safety is at risk. Even though during 20 years since Columbine, the risk of a student being killed in a school shooting was 1 out of 614 million. One of my first reasons for running for school board was my fear that the board could vote to arm teachers. My fear was validated when I saw the campaign literature of Manny Nichols was listed pro-Second Amendment. I have no idea what support of the Second Amendment has to do with decisions made by a school board. I must assume that he would propose arming teachers. I believe that introducing inadequately armed staff into our classrooms would drastically increase the chance of a student or staff member being injured or killed.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder.
School safety is a big issue, and a lot of people worry more about it than ever. Media coverage of it is played up. It's a horrible thing. sometimes we make unwise decisions, but I definitely would agree with the idea that every school should have its own officer in order to maintain the safety that is necessary. And I would say, and I would agree with others who have said already, each school should have its own officer.
Thank you. Next will be Brandon.
Yeah, recently, Hollidaysburg received a Safe Schools grant, and the current plan is to use that for a 5th school resource officer to cover the 3 elementary schools, 1 per school. And I support that. I think there's a lot of ways that we could use that money, and I would think that the first step is to have 1 resource officer in each school. So absolutely, I would support that.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki.
I currently serve on the Safe Schools Committee in our district, and I believe we're doing a very good job with school safety. Our district has been very proactive, thanks to our administration, on making sure that our students and our staff are all as safe as they possibly can be. We will always have to be vigilant as individuals in our buildings and make sure that we are reporting anything suspicious. And now you probably know there's a statewide reporting system, Safe to Say, where anyone can report anything at any time of the day or week that they see that's suspicious. We have countywide law enforcement all working together to make sure our schools are safe. We just hired a new resource officer, which is going to help us a lot. We're doing age-appropriate safety drills, so we're really making a lot of strides, and I'm happy for that.
Thank you. And last to go will be Lona.
The question is, in the event of an emergency, would we want to have an SRP available at every school? I would contend that even without an emergency, I would want that presence at the school. And Brandon is right. We are, through a grant that the school was able to secure, we will be having that 5th officer representing the elementary school. I'll take on Tom's number where he said there's only 1 out of a 614 million chance of a student getting shot. Under any circumstances, that's 1 too many. I wouldn't want it for my child or for any child for that matter. So I think anything that we can do as a district to secure our buildings and our children, we should be doing that. And in addition, I think the officers provide order and assistance to the staff when their focus is to be on teaching. So I do think the SRP serves multiple purposes for being in a building.
Thank you.
The second question for the safety category is, aside from resource officers, do you think our school district takes the correct precautions to keep students safe? If not, what would you change and why? And we will begin with Doug, please.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a great question. There's always room for improvement in terms of school safety, as both Mrs. Kanashiki and Ms. Frye have, reported to you in terms of their current service on the board. There are lots of great policies already in place. If there's one area where I would suggest, and this is just based on my own experience as a parent with kids in the district, that we might want to take a look at. We do so much to protect our students in the building proper, but during the school day, especially at the elementary levels, the playgrounds are open to public access at the same time that our kids are using those playgrounds. And purely from a safety standpoint, that's one area where I would suggest we take a look.
Thank you. Now, Tom, please.
Many of the students that I worked with, when they came to school, that was the safest part of their day. A lot of their homes, they were much more risky than when they came to school. That said, school shootings don't happen randomly like somebody walking into a Walmart and shooting the place up. It's typically a student that's had some difficulties, knows someone in the building. So the awareness of the staff and support services within the district, such as 8th grade screening, depression screenings, and other mental health services, or it can prevent something like that from happening. We have to treat this in-house.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder.
Not an easy question, not easy to solve. Anywhere in the United States, that's a big question with security. How do we protect the people within? Specifically, how do we protect the people within? I'm pretty sure it'll never come to a point where you get zero failure. There will be times. There will be times of grief and difficulty. There's no reason at all, as one member has already said, to put every effort into what is necessary to keep our kids safe, my grandkids safe, and I guess you should end a sentence with "and," but I'll end it.
Thank you. Now we will have Brandon, please.
Okay, I think Doug said it right. He said that there's always room for improvement, and he's certainly right about that. But I think if we get this 5th resource officer, we get each building covered that way, I think that's a great first step. Also, I've been happy to say that I've heard a lot over the last several board meetings about different improvements that have been made. One is that the security systems that have been installed in the various buildings. One is, even though we might not want to think about this, bullet-resistant film that's been put on a lot of the windows to protect the windows that are on the outside. And then I personally have been communicated with. I have 2 children that attend Frankstown, and a couple times there have been lockdowns and really good communication from the administration, from the teachers to the parents. So they're doing a great job.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki, please.
Well, again, I go back to the active shooter drills. They're very important. I had been advocating for those for several years, and I'm really glad we're doing them in the school district. I have a lot of confidence in our law enforcement community, and we have very good school resource officers that also help with recommendations. They have training in this area, and we do rely on their expertise. Parents can help also by doing participating in active shooter drills and understanding what that means, and being vigilant yourself, because you can instill these qualities into your children, and you can do this. This is now unfortunately a way of life, and we have to be vigilant all the time, and this is something you can do as a family, and a lot of churches are doing these active shooter drills, so it's something to consider to make this mindset something that we can, carry on with us throughout our lives, not just in school.
Thank you. Lanna, please.
Yes, we are equipped with SRP officers, and it's wonderful for our district from a safety perspective. But we also do weekly safety drills and active shooting drills where we work with local law enforcement. And I can tell you that safety and security of buildings, of people, of students is of utmost concern and interest to administration and the board. We're doing everything we can at this point, and we're not stopping. We're continuing. We're finding new areas to improve. One of the areas that was recently implemented was sending home information to parents, to Lois's point, informing parents and educating parents of what to look for, when to make announcements, when to raise up issues, escalate issues, and where actually you escalate those issues to. So yes, I believe we need to do it, and I do believe that we are doing it.
Thank you. Tim, please.
Okay, once again, speaking to the officer, some of the strides that I commend the board for making is installing the lobby guard, the Navigate system that the teachers use to put on their phones for student accountability and staff during drills of this type, the active shooter drill that Mrs. Kanashiki mentioned. They just did a weapons sound at the high school. Again, Mrs. Kanashiki mentioned in the safety committee, which is really something very good for the district. The portable and handheld metal detectors, the scenarios that they run through the school district. But one of the biggest things that the resource officer said is the district is willing to listen. And I think that's one of the most important things.
Thank you. Going along with school safety, our next question is, since bullying is a major issue for today's students, what role do you see the school board having in preventing and or addressing bullying? We will first have Tom, please.
The purpose of the school board is to set policy. It's the job of the superintendent to manage the buildings with the administrators. As mentioned before, I see a lot of this happening at the school level. It's not random shooters going into a Walmart. We need kids more aware of social media. We need them reporting when they have a friend or peer that's struggling. We need to stop having the stigma associated with mental illness to where somebody actually comes forward and says, hey, I'm struggling, or someone reports their friend or goes to the SAP office or Mrs. Eckenrose or somebody and says, hey, my friend's struggling here. He's posting things that are dangerous.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I think that the ad that says, if you see something, say something, is rather brief, but rather effective. Keep your eyes open, your ears open. We should be aware of that from teacher to student to anybody that has a responsibility in the school building. Say something if you see something. If it doesn't seem quite right, it'll be better to check it out.
Thank you. Brandon?
Bullying is certainly an issue that you asked about what the school board can do, and they can be part of the solution, but I think it's a team effort. There's needs of the board to set policies to prevent bullying and to address bullying when it occurs, but also the administration plays a part, teachers play a part, parents, and fellow students. So I think the board can do some things. They can't do it alone. I think there's a lot of parts that need to be addressed so that we can work on this very important issue.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
Bullying isn't a new problem. You all know you had bullies when you grew up. It's not pleasant to be bullied. I think it's gotten worse because of texting and social media. I've actually seen kids argue by text message instead of speaking to one another. Possibly a good life lesson would be to get some kids together who are feuding over social media and actually get them in a room and look at one another in the face instead of trying to communicate over these artificial means that allows people to hide behind a crutch of social media and a text message. That's no way to address your fellow people. If you have something, especially something critical to say it to their face.
Thank you. Lanna?
The role of the board when it comes to bullying is to set and approve policies, but it goes beyond that. As human beings, everyone on the board has a responsibility to do just what everyone has said. We need to say what we see. If you hear things from your neighbors, your children, that's all stuff that needs to be passed back to the schools through the proper channels. I do believe that it takes communication between teachers, students, neighbors, just anyone to make that kind of communication, to build awareness. I also think it is the job of the board to approve spending for things that will help with the mental well-being and general emotional awareness of our students and faculty and staff. I believe that is an important step.
Thank you. Tim?
I'd like to reinforce what everyone was saying as far as the board's position, that it is to set policy, but it's also to work with the administration, the teachers, and the staff on the programs that they're implementing with the guidance counselors. And I know in a number of different buildings, they're doing a number of different types of activities like that, and it's our job as the board to support and approve those activities.
Thank you. Doug?
Hearing everybody talk about bullying reminds me of an amusing moment we had at home one time when one of our 4 children came home as a kindergartner, and we asked what, I'll say he or she, just so I don't identify which child, and said, yeah, we learned all about how to be a good bully today. So we kind of righted that ship, but I think, and the reason I'm sharing that story with you, I think it starts with educating the students and, teaching them both at home and at school, how to be good human beings and treat each other well. And there are good policies in place. We have a lot of focus on character ed within our school systems. As I said before, there's always room for improvement, but it's certainly an important topic, and I applaud the current administration for seeing it as such.
Thank you.
We will now be moving on to our next question. Students are currently taught to run, hide, or fight in an emergency situation. What is your opinion of this strategy? We're going to start with Mr. Snyder.
Could you repeat that? I had trouble hearing you.
Sure thing. Students are currently taught to run, hide, or fight in an emergency situation. What is your opinion of this strategy?
Tom, can you tell me what that is?
Really kind of like when we were kids, get under the desk, but it's run and hide, run, take on it.
I see. I'm sorry about the hearing part of it. I got new hearing aids recently, and they're not doing what they should. You're asking about what should be procedure when there is emergency?
What is your opinion on this strategy? What do you think of it?
That's a common strategy.
I'm not sure. I have no opinion on that.
So, next we'll have Brandon speak.
Sure. So the question was related to run, hide, or fight with regard to having an active shooter, that sort of thing in the school. The best way to be prepared for a school shooter is to be prepared, be vigilant. I recently attended an active shooter training this year, and that was the same strategy that what we were told, being in an industrial environment, in an office environment, that sort of thing, is to run, hide, and then fight last. And so I certainly support that. I think, I know my children have been through more drills and training probably than I was through in 12 years at school. So I appreciate that Hollidaysburg's providing that, and I certainly support that method.
Thank you, Mrs. Kanashiki.
Run, hide, fight is the accepted proper strategy to avoid danger. If you're in a dangerous situation, the best thing to do is get the heck out of there. You run and you get out of there, and you hide. Fighting is always a last resort. You do it if you have to, but when you fight, somebody can get hurt or worse. So run, hide, fight, I approve of that.
Thank you. Lana?
Run, hide, fight, it is a consistent method of teaching basically how to deal with a difficult situation. I agree, it builds the consistency. The teachers, the administration, and the students are all learning a similar way to deal with difficult situations. These situations are not intended to frighten or scare. They're intended to build familiarity and awareness so that in the event that something does happen, everyone is not in shock. They're able to think through, slow down, and know that they've experienced this on a similar level before with the familiarity of what to do. So yes, I believe run, hide, and fight is a consistent level of teaching that is good.
Thank you. Next we'll have Tim.
I agree with everyone on the board that run, hide, fight is a proven way of doing it. I do think, though, that we need to practice it a little bit more, because I know of one teacher that experienced it during the active shooter drill that just happened, and their first instinct was actually to hide first instinct was to run instead of hide, and if they would have thought through it and they would have run, they would have been shot. So we need to practice it more is what I would say.
Thank you. Doug?
I too agree that it is a great method for instilling a sense of how to react in these situations that we pray never occur. It's based on, I think, our human instincts, right, of the whole concept of fight or flight. And it really does a lot, I think, in terms of creating a sense, hopefully, of less fear, I don't think I would say calmness, but less fear, both on the part of students and teachers in terms of how to react in those kinds of scenarios.
Thank you. We will finish up with Tom.
I think Tim made a good point as far as the strategy applies differently depending on where you're at when there's a threat. Do you stay where you are hiding? Do you run? My classroom was next to the planetarium here. I had a door going out into a courtyard where you couldn't escape from. A shooter or anybody, assailant, could come in through the library into the courtyard and then come to me. Right? So I thought through things like this, like, okay, do I take my kids down the stairwell of the planetarium because it's dark in there and the shooter wouldn't find the lights? It's very uncomfortable to have to think about your own safety and the safety of your students in that manner. You lock the doors, blocking the windows in the doorway, you can see in these classrooms. There are wall latches cheap things that I saw some company marketing, where you hook it to just to a wall and you run it over the door latch to where they can't open a door.
Thank you.
We will now change topics to student wellness. First question is, do you think it is important for students to have both in-school and out-of-school opportunities to learn, become active citizens? We will begin with Brandon.
Absolutely. I think the best way for students to have a mental wellness and to have a healthy lifestyle is to be part of something, be part of a team, be part of a club, and to give our students opportunities to participate in activities so they don't feel marginalized. One example that I have is at Frankstown we have something called Walking Club, and it's just what it sounds like. After school, a group of students go out with a few teachers and they walk the track for about an hour. My son loves it. He started in 2nd grade. It's a great example of a activity where many students can participate, and it's enjoyable. They get to talk, kind of feel part of something. And so absolutely, I think that's very important to have both in and out of school activities.
Thank you. Next, we will have Mrs. Kanashiki.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. Do you think it is important for students to have both in-school and out-of-school opportunities to learn and become active students?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of students do take advantage of opportunities outside of the school district. We're fortunate that we offer a whole lot of activities right here in our school district, and I think it's very important that students have other ways to learn and grow and participate outside of their academic lives, to learn to work with other types of people on different sorts of projects, to be more directed in different types of ways, and yeah, it's very important, and I'm glad that we do have so many of those opportunities here in our district.
Thank you. Now we will have Lanna, please.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree that in-school and out-of-school opportunities are key for the mental well-being of our students. The reason being for out-of-school, obviously in-school we have a lot of programming recently and some that have been in place for a while that are beneficial to kids dealing with other kids within the school, and then they can carry that to the outside. The benefit of going out of school for opportunities is that you're going to meet people out there who may not think the way you think, who may not believe in the things that you believe. And in those instances, that's where we need kids to have the mental stability and the awareness and the respect to be able to deal with situations that may not be as familiar or as consistent as they are within the school environment. So yes, in school and out of school both present great opportunities for our children.
Thank you. Now we will have Tim, please.
As everyone else has said, I totally agree that we should, as board members, support opportunities for students in school and out of school. It's all part of a well-rounded education, and we as board members need to make sure that whatever programs are in place, that we are supporting them in whatever way we can.
Thank you. We will now have Doug, please.
As the former high school band director here for the district, I got to see for a decade the benefits of both in and out of school programs. It's no secret, that we're proud of our arts programs in the district, but there are a lot of other great opportunities in addition to that, whether it be school athletics or clubs. I think one of the keys to our success as a district is what a great job we do of giving students access to opportunities. And certainly in recent years, that focus has been narrowed to really look at the total wellness of students and give them as much of an outlet both during the day and after school, and I support that wholeheartedly.
Thank you. We will now have Tom, please.
Yeah, I concur with the others, but I would want to point out that a lot of the higher risk students are the least likely to take those opportunities. They don't see themselves as part of the school. They don't see themselves as part of the society or the town. They see themselves separate. They see their families as separate. They're not going to join in the in-school activities, and there's very few places outside that sometimes even want them. I applaud the YMCA. For years, I could pick up the phone, and they would just say, okay, who's the student? Send them over and give them a 3 months free membership to the YMCA. And then I'd meet the student there, and we try and get them, some place they could go, but there aren't a lot of opportunities for them.
Thank you. We will finish up with Mr. Snyder, please.
Activities in all areas are important, but I think Tom has come up with something there that's very important, and that is identifying with the group that you're a part of. It used to be called school pride, but there's a lot of people that are angry, and they could care less. And we're limited as to what we can do there. Again, you come back to say, if you know something, say something about it. The idea of outside activities is excellent.
Thank
and there
you.
needs to be more of them, both in church, in community, and elsewhere.
Thank you. Our next question in the students' wellness category would be, with mental health appearing to become more and more of an issue, what are your plans for dealing with mental wellness of our students? We will start off with Mrs. Kanashiki.
This is a subject I've thought a lot about in the past year, so I've written down some ideas. We need teacher in service to train teachers on warning signs of mental illness in their age-appropriate areas, because the manifestations of mental illness are different in different age groups. We should think about including this training in university teacher training programs, teacher training programs. We should include more of this in health class curricula, mental health education for our children as well. I would like to see adult mentor programs. The most important thing for kids at risk is that they have somebody to talk to, and a safe adult would be a great way to address that.
Thank you. Lanna?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. With mental health appearing to become more and more of an issue, what are your plans for dealing with mental wellness of our students?
It has been a source of subject that has been talked about on the board and through administration. And in fact, we've started a student wellness activities team, which I was proud to be part of. We involved the community, we involved staff, we involved students in that effort. I believe what is most beneficial from that is the idea that kids are connected, that kids feel like they matter, kids are noticed when they're not there. That is what is the building blocks for good mental wellness, knowing that you're cared about and someone is worried about you or cares about what you're doing. I believe the school has taken great strides in focusing on that. I don't believe we're finished with that effort. I think we're just simply tipping the iceberg, and that moving forward there will be many more efforts for that.
Thank you. Tim?
I would, if I were elected as a board member, I would wholeheartedly support the programs that Lanna just mentioned. Basically, all I can basically say is, according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a child can't learn unless their basic needs are met. And if they're struggling with problems, they're not going to be able to focus on their education.
Thank you. Doug?
This is certainly, as has been stated, an area of increasing concern. In addition to the SWAT program that Lanna referred to, there's also a new program being piloted this year at CW Longer. It's something that I hope really takes root and becomes available to all of the district. It's a program referred to as Community in Schools for Better Behavioral Health. And it's really in place in a large part due to the efforts of Dr. Endler. So I really support and thank her for that effort. As I understand it, not only is it creating opportunities for students with at-risk issues as it relates to their wellness, but it is also creating opportunities to make our teachers feel more secure in that area as well. So I look forward to seeing how that's going to help our students moving forward.
Thank you. Tom?
When I attended K-12, K through 12, student wellness meant that you didn't have the measles, chicken pox, or the mumps. Today we recognize that good health encompasses much more than outward manifestations. As a member of the Student Assistance Program, or SAP, I became acutely aware that many students were dealing with wellness issues that were not readily picked up on by the staff. Many students do not self-report, and it is often referral begun by a close peer of the student. This is often a star athlete or other high-profile student that you would not know something's going on. We must erase the stigma associated with mental illness and emotional challenges. Data demonstrates that the earlier we can intervene, the better the long-term outcome. And I applaud that we have started screening at 8th grade level for other mental illnesses going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
Solving people's personal problems involves a lot of things. And I'm sure that everybody that has been associated in education knows that more and more responsibility is being placed on the teacher and the school to bail out families that have become so dysfunctional that a student doesn't even have a fighting chance. It's no relief to go home. It's a relief to go to school. But they may not even like school. But it's a place to hide. That's why we see more and more faculty, more and more helpers needed in the schools. My sister works in a helping situation. She sees what's happening in homes.
Thank you. Brandon?
A lot of good ideas up here. I fully support educating our teachers. I know all the teachers and administrators at Hollidaysburg have been through trauma training. I think it's a good start. There are also other components that they could be taught about and to be educated on. The other thing I don't think I heard up here was preparing parents. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. There's no guidebook given to be how to be a parent and how to recognize the signs of mental well-being and that sort of thing. So I certainly would propose that we work to prepare our parents to raise resilient children.
Thank you. We will now be moving on to our next question. Multiple studies have shown that moving secondary school start times to 9 or 8 a.m. instead of 7:30 increases student productivity. Do you have any plans to move school start times? Why or why not? We're going to start with Lanna.
Quite honestly, I have no plans, but it's not that I'm opposed to it. I just have not given thought to that. I know there are a lot of other issues that go hand in hand, not just with the start time, but it's related to busing and transportation and coordinating that with all of the elementary schools, junior high and high school. So quite honestly, I have not thought of that. I don't stand on either way. I would simply rely on recommendations and data that is presented to us as board member and make that determination based on facts and data provided at the time.
Thank you. Next we'll have Tim.
I once again don't have any plans to do something like that, but I do know that California is in the process right now of implementing that because of studies have shown that if students get more sleep, they perform better in school. And it also showed that just because the start times were later, it didn't mean that the children were going to be going to bed later. So there is some kind of hormone or something in their system that showed that they will get more sleep and they will perform better. But as Lanna said, there are a number of issues that we would have to tackle before we implemented that.
Thank you. Doug?
I can't say I have specific plans, but it is something that I've had several conversations with folks about. And I've got 4 kids, 2 teenagers and 2 elementary age, and so we see both sides of that coin every morning in our house. And I wonder sometimes if it would be better for high school aged kids to start later. Certainly, just looking at their morning routines, elementary kids are much more easily convinced that it's time to get up and start your day, let's go, right? Where maybe adolescents aren't quite as eager to do so. So I know there are schools both in the Midwest and on the West Coast that have piloted some of those programs. It would be a major undertaking to make those kind of changes, but I think it is something perhaps in the future of education that we need to take a look at.
Thank you. Tom?
There is a lot of research out there that shows that the internal circadian clock, whatever that is, for teenagers is completely out of kilter with the school days that we give them and starting earlier. And a lot of them are piloting, starting the elementary kids first, then going. There's a lot of problems with busing and all the logistics and everything else, but I have no plans on that. But on another note, I have to comment on something that my cohort Ken just said, and that's bailing out families, dysfunctional families. That connotates a moral judgment to me, and I don't think we should be judging these families. I think there, by the grace of God, go I.
Thank you. Now we'll be moving on to Mr. Snyder.
I, like some others, have no real plan about changing schedules. In response to Tom, I don't mean that we need to establish moral grounds. I don't want the school board to do that. I wouldn't want to be a part of such a thing. But I don't want it to be skipped over either and show that it is not important, extremely important. You've got to communicate with your kids. You've got to make them stop and look you in the eye if you want them to know something and say, I mean it. Or now and then, it doesn't hurt even for a tough guy father to say to his sons, hey son, I love you. Hope you have a decent day at school today.
Thank you.
Those go beyond
We'll now
moral
be moving on
judgments.
to Brandon.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I think the question was related to school start times, later school start times, and I feel pretty certain that was written by one of our Hollidaysburg High School students, I'm guessing. I'm certainly, similar to the rest of the panel here, I'm not opposed to that idea. I really just don't know enough about it. Certainly it's something I would be interested in learning more about, and probably talking to a variety of people, including students, teachers, administrators, about what effect that would have at Hollidaysburg, but certainly willing to try that if you feel like that would be effective.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
Yes, I've been advocating for changing start times for 3 years. High school students need more sleep. We can let them sleep a little later, pick up the younger kids and take them to school first. It has been correlated with better achievement, better grades for high school students. I know it's logistically a very difficult undertaking, but if we put our minds to it, we can do it. So I am a big supporter of changing start times.
Thank you.
We will now move to the last question in the student wellness category. Explain your point of view on homework policies. Who should decide the amount of homework given? The school board, the district administration, the principal, or the classroom teacher? We will begin with Tim, please.
I know the board has a policy on homework. I can't say that I'm familiar with it. I just do know we have a policy on it. But I would say that, in my opinion, it should come from the classroom teacher, because the classroom teacher is the one teaching the students and wanting them to reinforce whatever they're doing in the classroom so that they learn the concepts and are prepared to come back the next day.
Thank you. We will now move to Doug.
I hope, for obvious reasons, that it should be in the hands of the teacher. As a former educator myself, I can't imagine what kind of environment it would create in the classroom if someone else was dictating, what kind of assignments and homework and things had to be doled out to your students. I think that would really upset the balance of class dynamic and how things work for, doing what's best to educate our students. I would assume that was probably also a question from the student panel.
School board set policies, and the superintendent, administrators, and the teachers decide how they're running the school. For a school board to have a set amount of homework flies in the face of individualized education. The teachers know who the student is, how rigorous they can make the work for them, how much they can adapt. On the flip side, they can be adapting the assignments, paring things down for certain students. So it's totally up to the teacher.
Thank you. We will now move to Mr. Snyder.
I certainly would agree with that. There is a special relationship between student and teacher. And I'm sure that those of us who are old enough here on this panel, and those of you in the audience who are old enough, can look back and see that you had a favorite teacher and you had a teacher that you were deathly afraid of. I was always afraid of my English teachers, all of them, because it was a tough thing for me. But you cannot start supplementing that kind of activity to somebody outside the classroom. It is not going to work. The closer you can build student and classroom, the better you can solve most of the problems we've been talking about.
Thank you. We will now move to Brandon.
Our teachers at Hollidaysburg are trained professionals. They went to school to learn how to be a teacher well. We should trust them to do the right thing for our students. So they should be the first voice when it comes to amount of homework, when the homework is given, and that sort of thing. I think administration probably has a voice in that, primarily just to see all of the teachers and see all of what they're giving, make sure there's, in the addition of all of them stacked together, that there's not too much or not enough, that sort of thing. But the board should really be the last voice when it comes to amount of homework given. I think in most instances, the board doesn't need to have a voice in the amount of homework given.
Thank you. We will now move to Mrs. Kanashiki.
I encourage parents to read the district's policy on homework. If you feel the policy is being violated, you should go to the teacher first, then if you can't get satisfaction there, you go to the principal, and then the next is the superintendent, and then the board. If you feel the policy should be changed, then you should come to the superintendent and the school board members. But there's no way that the school board can micromanage homework, and we have to trust that our teachers are giving purposeful work that is building skills, developing and giving students the skill developing that they need to learn the coursework.
Thank you. We will finish up with Lanna, please.
The simple answer is teachers should determine what is appropriate homework for their classroom. However, there are teams of people, Dr. Gilday, Dr. Endler, and principals who go in and evaluate teachers and their strategies and determine their effectiveness and check their achievement. And through all of that, I believe if there are instances where students or parents feel like there's unbearable homework, I believe that there is communication steps in order that people are free to take. And oftentimes that will bring about change if necessary. But I think 100% we need to rely on the teachers to determine what level of homework is necessary to teach the subjects that they are called to teach our students.
Thank you. We will now talk about curriculum. The first question is, what is your philosophy of education? Student academic achievement in the United States lags behind any other countries according to the National Assessment of Educational Process. If elected, how will you reverse this trend? How will you ensure that Hollidaysburg Area School District students are prepared to compete in a global economy? We will first start off with Doug.
That's a loaded one.
Yeah, really, there's a lot in there.
You know, there's a lot of statistics that talk about the state of affairs in education today. You know, you can study it till you're blue in the face and not come up with any answers. I do know that I'm, committed to trying to focus on what's best for our students here at Hollidaysburg and looking at the education of the whole student. We've hit on several other areas today, in terms of wellness. We're getting into curriculum now, looking at the needs of each individual student as opposed to the sort of old school method of, the Industrial Revolution of just educating the masses. And I think that's, where we can make the most significant changes in a shorter amount of time. Preparing our kids for a global economy, I think is, definitely part of the education model, but it takes time to make those kind of changes happen.
Thank you. Tom?
When you're analyzing statistics, you have to understand whether there are comparable groups. If you're comparing, say, China and the U.S. in academic achievement, they don't have to have special needs kids in that classroom. They don't follow the same laws and rules that we do here. We have, my wife's who's out there, her niece lives in Hong Kong. And these kids are, the amount of homework, they don't have any friends after school because all their peers are sitting there doing homework into the late evening. So if that's what we want, that's what we want to compare ourselves to, and that's the society we want to live in, where they're not playing sports, they're not having outside activities, they're not looking at clouds or anything else that you want to do in your life, then worry about the numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
The wider the divide in our cultural makeup is going to make it more difficult for education to be zeroing in on the important matters that our students need. It only makes sense. If you're looking at things in an entirely different way, we are so divided as a country right now in our cultural values even, that it's impossible to bring them together without dumbing down every side there is and losing every strength in what many families feel is strength.
Thank you. Brandon?
I think students, parents, and teachers all probably groan a little bit when you hear the term standardized testing. I think that it does provide good data. We need that information for comparison purposes. I was at the school board meeting last week when Dr. Endler and some of the principals talked about PSSA results from last year. And we should be proud of the fact that Hollidaysburg scored better than state averages in every category and every grade. And we should take pride in that. However, we can't be satisfied with that. And we also need to think about that there's more than just the numbers. There's preparing our students for life. And so I don't know that we can be fully focused on driving our numbers above other countries, maybe on other things as well.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
Mr. McCaffrey is right about China. We don't have to be like China to have our kids do well in math. Unfortunately, the adoption of the Common Core standards have set us back in math, not put us forward, and that's a problem, but it's here for now. We've got to deal with it. We've been told that now the teachers have options to teach math in other ways other than the the new Common Core way, which is a problem, but math achievement is the highest predictor. Math achievement in high school is the highest predictor of college success. So math is important, and we have to find a way to make sure our students stay on track with math. Also, being a good reader is also, you can go far in life if you are a good reader, because so much of the world requires reading. So I'm a back to basics kind of person.
Thank you. Lanna?
As a board member, what would I do to prepare students to make sure they're ready to compete? I think it would be exactly what I've been doing and what the school has been doing. We evaluate data, we talk with teachers, we look at students' results on tests. We interview students post-graduation and compare information. To Lois's point of wanting to increase math skills of our students, there was programming put into place, educational classes that are focused on improving math skills, and it's done in a way that we're learning that kids, students are actually enjoying. They're actually finding it instrumental, and we haven't seen numbers yet, but I'm confident that we will see an improvement in that, and that's the kind of remediation that we need to do when we recognize an area that might be lagging or a little bit behind. Take the steps necessary to improve and be willing to do that.
Thank you. Tim?
Okay, first of all, that question had an awful lot in it. But one of the first things I think we need to do, everyone on this panel, everyone in this room, everyone in this country needs to stop beating up on public education. Public education is doing well, and to Tom's point, when we're analyzing the data, that data can be skewed to show anything you want it to show. I do know that in other countries, they don't test every kid. In our country, we test every kid, no matter what their IQ is. And so the results aren't really showing what our kids are capable of doing. I think our school district's doing an amazing job, and I will continue to promote that.
Thank you. We will now be moving on to our next question. Knowing that society expects more from children at an earlier age, what do you think should be taught in kindergarten, and what skills do you think all students entering kindergarten should have already acquired? If the student entering kindergarten does not meet the minimum requirement, how would you handle that situation? We'll start with Tom.
Ooh, tough one.
Really?
I haven't studied early childhood education in a lot of years, and my children are in their 30s. As far as the skills associated with early childhood, I don't know. As far as how you handle it if they're not ready for that, there's an assessment, I believe, done before someone enters kindergarten on that skill levels and things. And I don't know if we have remediation programs or not before that. I don't think we do. But I think it might be up to the parent. You assess the child and say, okay, this is where your child's at. He's ready for kindergarten, or the child may struggle and you may want to hold them back a little bit.
Thank you. Next we'll have Mr. Snyder.
Determining where any child is at is a difficult thing. I've had 7 children of my own. I have 19 grandchildren, and they're all different. And some of them are smart as a whip, and some of them aren't. Where should they start? Who should I go to? Why should I do this or that? What do I have to sit down and talk to them about and say, come on, let's get on the stick here. You know, you're going to be behind. I don't know exactly the answer to that, even after all that experience. I do know that everyone needs attention. You've got to know everyone. You have to know everyone. And the more we can be familiar with our students, the easier it's going to be to teach them.
Thank you. Brandon?
This one hits home for me. So I have a daughter who's in first grade, so not too far separated from being ready for kindergarten. Going into kindergarten, she knew her numbers from 1 to 10. She knew her letters A to Z. I think most children are capable of that. If they're not, we need to be ready to prepare them in the kindergarten system to be able to do those basic things so they're ready for continuing education beyond that. But I think there's something even more important that we need to teach our kindergartners, and that is that it's fun to learn. I think so that's something that I learned many years ago. It stayed with me forever, and I think that's where you really teach the kids that the ability to learn, the ability to learn new things and to be involved in your community, that sort of thing, is an important aspect of life, and it will carry them through the rest of the grades.
Thank you, Mrs. Kaneshiki.
In my opinion, the Common Core standards are not age appropriate for kindergarten learners. They're too stressful. There's too much in there. 5-year-olds come into kindergarten at all different levels because little kids just develop at very different rates. And just because one 5-year-old isn't at the same rate as another 5-year-old doesn't mean this one 5-year-old can't learn or isn't smart or isn't going to be a successful academic student. It doesn't mean that at all. And kindergarten teachers know that. Putting more pressure on kindergarten teachers to have higher bars of learning at age 5 is just ridiculous. So people need to lighten up about kindergarten and just let the kids be kids.
Thank you. Lana?
I cannot speak to the preparedness requirements for early childhood education, but I'm certain there are people who can, and those people are employed in our district. There are agencies, local agencies, who are set up who are able to intervene prior to children entering kindergarten, and I'm hoping that that system works. I'll go along with what Brandon had said. I think one of the most important things, aside from ABCs and numbers, is that children learn in elementary school or in kindergarten that it is enjoyable, that it's exciting to learn, that you're safe there, that you're happy, that you make friends, that you can employ empathy and show forgiveness, the basic building blocks for a human being. That is a focus of kindergarten, and whether or not they're prepared academically, I think that comes, and I think there are people who are equipped to make that determination.
Thank you. Next we'll have Tim.
I first want to start by saying being a kindergarten teacher is probably one of the hardest jobs that I know of. I bless every one of them that I walk by. And I totally agree with Mrs. Kaneshiki that the activities should be developmentally appropriate. There's no doubt about it. And we need to stop labeling these kids as behind as soon as they walk in the door.
Thank you. And lastly, we'll have Doug.
I think the importance of early childhood development is paramount to the future success of our educational system. I second Tim's notion that some of the most amazing teachers in any school system are the kindergarten teachers because of the tremendous task they're faced with every year for trying to get all of those kids to the same point, moving on to first grade. But these formative years from toddler through basically third grade really are what set the bar for these children for the rest of their lives. And so everything we can do to not only encourage them to want to be learners, but to develop the brain that God has given them, that's when they're forming all those connections and really is what's going to establish how effective they are as learners for the rest of their adulthood.
Thank you.
The next question in the curriculum category is, with many varying viewpoints today, how will you decide whether or not a new school textbook or other classroom material is appropriate for student use? We will begin with Mr. Snyder.
And again, I want to ask you to repeat that slower and louder.
With many varying viewpoints today, how will you decide whether or not a new school textbook or other classroom material is appropriate for school use?
What's contained in textbooks today wasn't contained in textbooks that I had starting out in a one-room schoolhouse with a teacher that taught 3 grades, and life was entirely different. More and more curriculum has reshaped a certain format and a certain segment of our culture. It's a tough job to write a book. It's a tough job to write a textbook. Everything isn't objective. Everything can't be reduced to a test tube. Everything can't be just recycled and suddenly come out with a uniform statement.
Next, we will have Brandon.
I think it's interesting in 2019 we're still talking about textbooks because we've got a rapidly changing community, we've got a rapidly changing environment, and what our children learn today shouldn't be contained in a book that's 20 or 30 years old. I think in terms of answering the question, what role would the school board play? I think the role the school board plays in terms of choosing the material to learn should be fairly low compared to what the teachers and the administrators decide. The curriculum should be set by standards, but also by what is important in today's society, so that people understand what's going on in the world around them.
Thank you. We will now move to Mrs. Kanashiki.
My standards for approving textbooks are that they are balanced, they are truthful, and that they are ideologically neutral. And I'll give you an example how a textbook the district recently adopted that I voted against is not ideologically neutral. A science textbook should not be advocating for raising taxes to pay for research. That is a political statement. It doesn't belong in a scientific book. Now, as a side project, if the class wants to discuss how do we get these technological advances, that is a different situation. But if a book is going to advocate a political solution, it must have balance. It must give other points of view. A science book should not be getting into political solutions.
Thank you. We will now have Lanna, please.
The school board is privy to check all textbooks that are being recommended. It is up to the administration. They have put together a team of people who evaluate textbooks closely. They take 3 or 4 options, 5 options, and they pare it down to the one that they believe as educators will do the best job. For something to be ideologically neutral or objective doesn't mean that it's going to be black and white. And I think that's what we're finding in textbooks, is that different things are presented. And I think that's the job of the teacher then, to talk about the different areas, the different opportunities, the different ways to look at a theme. And it's up to the teachers to allow that conversation to happen and to present what is in the textbook. And then ultimately the students, as they're informed, will inform their own decisions based on where they live and their own thought processes and environment.
Thank you. We will now have Tim, please.
I'd like to add on to what Lanna has said about, we do have professionals in the district that we have hired to teach our students the number of different subjects. As board members, I don't know everything about science. I don't know everything about history. I don't know everything about math. That's why they're there. That's why we have those teams. And then they bring to us their textbook that they have picked to teach our students. And I'll once again second what Lanna said, then it's up to the teacher to take care of those ideological issues that may come up in the classroom.
Thank you. We will now have Doug.
Certainly, we have to have policies in place to decide what's appropriate or inappropriate for textbooks. But I think another thing to consider, if you look at trends in education and where we're headed, as someone who's taught at the college level as well, I can tell you, at least in recent years, less and less are textbooks a part of what are used to teach students, especially when you're trying to meet the needs of each individual learner. Technology, in my humble opinion, is where the future of education rests in terms of how we give our children access to the material they need. And I think that's where we need to focus our efforts in terms of safeguards that are being put in place to make sure the information that our students are being exposed to is both appropriate and hopefully apolitical. Thank you.
Thank you, and we will finish up with Tom.
I can't add to what Doug and Lanna said, but the decision should be based on peer-reviewed research in reputable journals. The decision shouldn't be found in Scientology, Ron Paul, the Chinese spiritual group Falun Gong, or the Heartland Institute that told us for years that cigarettes were not harmful.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will finish up our curriculum with, do you support the NIMSY program or the National Math Science Initiative at the senior high, which funds students in STEM advanced placement programs? How will the district fund the program when the grant ends next year? We will start with Brandon.
Could you repeat that question just one more time? Just the first part, I missed that.
Yeah, we're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay. Do you support the NIMSY program or the National Math Science Initiative at the senior high, which funds students in STEM advanced placement programs? How will the district fund the program next year when the grant ends?
Thank you. Yes, I do support that initiative. I think I started attending board meetings last year, and at the first board meeting I attended, what blew me away about Hollidaysburg in the district was the breadth of curriculum that was available to our students. I think that the size of our district gives us the opportunity for breadth, and these categories allow our students to be more prepared leaving high school to go on to whatever they want to, whether it be in college, to a trade school, to a two-year school, something of that nature. So absolutely, how you pay for it, I think that's a difficult answer without knowing exactly the cost of the program. But I would support finding ways to continue to have those courses available.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
I'm not sure how the NIMSY program relates to STEM. I guess they're related. It's a little puzzling to me why we've already got all our math teachers in place. We know what we're supposed to be teaching and why we need NIMSY on top of that. There's a lot of shiny objects being flown around to make things look a certain way, but let's remember our 8th graders just got a 35% proficiency. 35% of our 8th graders scored proficient, and proficient is a very low bar in math. So I'd rather focus on how are we going to bring our students all up to proficiency, and our better students should be excelling instead of waving the shiny objects in front of the parents.
Thank you. Lana?
NIMSY is an improvement, and it's something that we were fortunate to secure through a grant. As far as paying for it moving forward, I think what that will be the job of the board and the job of the administration. What we will need to do is to weigh the cost of that programming once the grant ends, and weigh the advantages that students are finding, seeing how their what results are coming from it. And through that evaluation, basically that's how the determinations are made. Where can we get the most for our money, our expenditures? And if NIMSY happens to be one that numbers work out well, then I'm sure that that's something we will pursue, but it will need to be measured against all of the other opportunities we have for spending.
Thank you. Tim?
I can't say that I'm very familiar with either of those programs, but I would say that I am in support of any type of program that gives our students more opportunities, and as Lana said, is an improvement. And as a board member, it would be our job to evaluate that and figure out ways to pay for it if it continues to be a benefit for our students.
Thank you. Doug?
For me personally, the jury is still out on whether NIMSY is an effective program. I certainly agree that when it comes to what resources make the most sense in terms of expense for the district, we have to look at all of our options and see how the numbers play out. My oldest child is someone who's going to participate in the NIMSY program this year, and so that's why I'm saying I'm kind of waiting to see if it is a worthwhile investment in terms of time, but we're hoping that he benefits from it. He's already a very math and science-oriented student, but I think anything we can do, based on trends in education to encourage our students to broaden their scope in terms of math and science, I think it's something we need to consider.
Thank you. Tom?
The role of the board is to evaluate, not just approve a budget, but to evaluate and hold people accountable for the decisions later. As Lanna said, you have to look at the numbers afterwards. Did we get the bang for the buck in the grant money? And then do we find sources for it? One of them possibly, along with the board funding, would be the Hollidaysburg Education Foundation. It does a lot with the grant money.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I'm not familiar with the program. Wouldn't be fair for me to be an evaluator of it. I'd just be wasting your time. But certainly I think the precaution has been sounded that we will check things out, we'll wait, we'll see, we'll ask questions and measure, and then make an objective decision. Other than that, there's no way I could forecast anything.
Thank you. Our next topic will be school building improvements. And our first question is, have any of you visited any district schools or attended any board meetings prior to running to prepare yourself for being a board member? And we'll start with Kaneshiki.
I've been attending board meetings for a while. Well, obviously the last 4 years before that, I'd been to several board meetings and studied the budget and a lot of other things. I have sat in classrooms and observed kindergarten, elementary, high school. I'm looking forward to going in the junior high. I haven't been there yet, but I have been in all the buildings, and I like to go in and see how the instruction is going and experience the children's school day, particularly in the morning. I feel in the morning students are fresh, and that's where they can get their most learning in, so I like to see how their morning goes. So I enjoy that, and I hope to do more of it this coming year.
Thank you. Next we'll have Lanna.
In 4 years, obviously, I have attended board meetings, obviously. I have also been to the buildings. We took a tour of the district when I first started with the board. As I said, I was a graduate of Hollidaysburg, and things have changed significantly in the buildings since my graduation. What has been brought to the board, that is critical and crucial, and I kind of rely on that as far as improvements that need to be made to the Capitol buildings themselves. I've talked informally to teachers and to students, and it is an important part, not just as board members, but even as community members. As a board member, though, I do appreciate being shared with and being able to go out and see for myself, to be able to help inform decisions when it comes, again, to spending and making the decisions on how we spend the money that is budgeted for the district.
Thank you. Tim?
Well, I was an employee of the school district for 9 years, so as the technology lead teacher, I was in every one of the buildings, so I'm very familiar with all the buildings. As far as attending board meetings, I don't attend them on a regular basis. I have been attending at least once a year, but while I was a school employee of the school district, I was at board meetings on a regular basis, and that was also in another school district that I worked for, that I attended school board meetings on a regular basis, so I'm familiar with the process.
Thank you. Next we'll have Doug.
When I was a teacher here, I was fortunate to teach in all 3 elementary buildings as well as the senior high, and did some instruction at the junior high as well. So I feel like I have a little bit of a leg up on the physical plant of the district itself. As far as attending board meetings, I have been to the last 2. So in terms of recent history, you can decide how effective that is. But when I was a teacher, we had several occasions to take students to perform, for board meetings, and that often times resulted in giving me the opportunity to see the inner workings of how that whole process, relates to the educational system. So I'm looking forward, hopefully, to having the opportunity to be a part of that.
Thank you. Next we'll have Tom.
As a parent of Hollidaysburg students, and then as a 14-year teacher, I was in every building in the district. I've been attending school board meetings for years. I've been attending them more often since I've started running. I've addressed the school board on various issues over the years multiple times. I have some strong opinions, and I've aired them in the school board meetings. And I appreciate that opportunity where I wish more people in the community would come and speak out. That's how a democracy works, and that's how a school board runs, by getting input from the community.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I retired from being a builder, carpenter, so I'm interested in buildings. I look at buildings a little bit different than other folks do, I guess. I think the buildings that the Hollidaysburg School District has are excellent buildings. Their upkeep is very good. Mr. Smith has done a fine job, I think, in maintaining the overall viability of the facilities that we have. And I have no question there. As far as attending school board meetings, I have attended 2 in my life, and they have been in the last few months, mainly because I needed to know a little bit more what's going on. My basic emphasis through life hasn't been in the public school board meetings, but in private school.
Thank you. I'll end with Brandon.
I've attended almost every board meeting since last December. I wanted to go and see a few board meetings before I decided to run for school board, and I've continued to attend those, and I can tell you I've learned a lot. I've been through budget presentations, I've been through a lot of different discussions, that sort of thing, and I've learned quite a great deal over the last year, and I encourage everyone in attendance to attend some of those board meetings. I think they're very well done, and probably could use better attendance at those. I'm also familiar, I've been in every school building in the last year. I am familiar with some of the more major projects that have been done recently, including the Frankstown roof replacement, and I'm also familiar with some of the needs of the school buildings going forward for the next 5 years.
Thank you. Our next question on school building improvements would be, in order to address building improvements, would you want to visit the buildings to see for yourself or experience the improvements firsthand? If the district buildings were in need of multiple improvements, how would you decide to prioritize the list? We'll start with Lanna.
I am not a builder, nor do I have much experience with construction, but I do know that Phil Smith, prior to his retirement, and Jonathan Nyhart, who is now his replacement, have a very firm hold on our district and the buildings within our district. I think it is important to visit. I don't think it's imperative. I think we rely on them for their professionalism to make the evaluations and determinations. And again, when it comes down to having multiple capital expenses that need to be made, it is the board's decision to decide what do we spend the money on. And it's the presentation of those gentlemen and that crew of people who know the details and can present and help us prioritize where we can bump some things and where we can't. I think that's critical. And that's kind of how I look at building improvements currently as my position on the board, is to listen to what's presented and evaluate and weigh in and ask questions. And I think that's how I would continue to deal with it moving forward.
Thank you. Tim?
I totally agree with Lana. I'm not a builder. I don't know anything about building, so I have to rely on the professionals that we hire in the district, and then prioritize that and use the information that they give us to make those decisions. There's nothing wrong with going and making the visit and having it explained to us so that we understand it a little bit better to make our decisions, but other than that, we have to rely on the professionals that we hire to do that.
Thank you. Doug?
I'm definitely a hands-on kind of guy, so I do like to go out and see the state of affairs as far as buildings and grounds go. It's imperative, obviously, that we have a team in place that are constantly monitoring the physical wellness of our district. But I also think it's really important that we continue to develop both a short and long-term set of goals in terms of what are the biggest priorities for our district. We're in the process of, for example, putting a new roof on Frankstown and then Foot of 10. We need to look at, all of our buildings in terms of age and where, we need to focus our interest in terms of those capital expenses. We have another elementary school sitting over here that's the oldest building in the district, and it definitely needs some attention.
Thank you. Tom?
I've had the same mechanic for about 20-something years, and I rely on him to tell me what I need, what it's going to cost, but more importantly, he'll tell me, you know, down the road about 6 months from now, we ought to be looking at those back brakes on the van. Your truck's going to be needing this down the road. I don't like surprises, and I appreciate that he's not spending my money before I need to spend it, but also telling me in advance, this is what's aging on your vehicles. You need to be looking ahead, and that way I can budget for things. And I think that Phil Smith, for years, I sat listening to him. He gave very in-depth explanations of why we needed to fix something. I mean, really in-depth. But it's also important that they tell the board, okay, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, these are the things that are going to wear out.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I do know something about building. I did hear that, I didn't know Frankstown was getting a new roof, but I did hear that Foot of 10 was. And I live on Foot of 10 Road, so I watch it every day. I don't always watch the roof, but I watch what's happening. I heard that, and so I talked to the original roofer on that building, and he said that building doesn't need re-roofed. That's good for another 10 years. And I couldn't see visibly from the ground whether that was true or not. I'd have to be up there on a ladder and checking it out. I do agree that there ought to be a schedule and there ought to be an alert when things are going to be coming due. That's only sensible, and we do it in our own homes.
Thank you. Brandon?
I'm currently the maintenance manager for an integrated pulp and paper mill that's over 150 years old. I also serve on the property committee in my church that's even older than that. So I am very used to having more needs and more wants in terms of building improvements than dollars to complete those needs and wants. So certainly I want to be a part of that effort. I think that the district does a good job of having a 5-year capital plan. And so I want to be, informed about that, be part of that decision making, so that we can make good decisions for the taxpayers, but also for the school itself.
Thank you. And lastly, Mrs. Konashiki?
We do have a 5-year plan in place of what we need in the next 5 years. I have had a concern for the past 2 years. At one time, we had 3 people on the school board who had building expertise. That was very, very helpful. And after this year, we're going to lose. We won't have those people. They're all gone. So I'm very glad that Ken Snyder agreed to run for school board, because he will be an asset in that regard. But it's important to have some expertise. We don't even though we want to repair things, we don't necessarily know what they should cost, and we don't want our school district getting overcharged for building projects, because we could put that money to use somewhere else. So it's a difficult problem, and we do have the 5-year plan, and we'll do the best that we can with that.
Thank you.
We will now move to the final question in the school building improvements category. During the early fall and late spring, the junior high and elementary schools get incredibly hot, and learning anything becomes nearly impossible. Do you see addressing this concern as a priority, and how would you find room in a stressed budget to address it? We will begin with Tim, please.
As far as addressing it as a priority, I think it's a safety concern for our students and our staff. There's a law against leaving your child in a car when it reaches a temperature, and they can die in that situation. And we do know that at that building, we've seen pictures and stuff where students are up there all day long in 100-degree temperature. There's no way that they can learn in that environment. I don't even know how the teachers can teach in that environment. So how we address it, I wouldn't know. I do think that it's something that it definitely needs looked at. I also know that there are rooms in some of the elementary buildings don't even have windows. We have teachers teaching in closets, basically. So that needs addressed too.
Thank you. We will now move to Doug.
it's hard for me not to look at that concern from a personal standpoint, because I taught in one of those rooms for 10 years that Tim is mentioning that has no windows. And it is an incredibly challenging environment to try and educate young learners when it's 90+ degrees in your room on any given day. I don't know what the answer is. I know it's a tremendously, expensive investment to look at air conditioning for our elementary buildings and the junior high as well. I wish I had a simple answer for that, but we have to really take a hard look at if there's any solution at all, just for the welfare of our teachers and students. We should consider what that might be.
Thank you. We will now move to Mr. Snyder.
Bill?
Sorry, Tom, please.
For about 8 years, I had a little room next to the library at CW Longer with no windows. I had a bulletin board that I changed the scenery on it, so I felt like I was outside. I was an itinerant emotional support teacher and covered 4 elementary schools. And I had audio-visual rooms. I was in every closet you could find in the buildings to work. It can be unbearable. There were times in hot weather at Longer, I remember trying to make phone calls. I had to talk to agencies regarding my students. I had to pack up and go to another air-conditioned building because I couldn't stay awake. Literally, I was falling asleep trying to work. We may have to look at almost like a snow day if we don't do something on the super hot days, as far as, okay, they don't have school today, or you have a half day, something like that.
Thank you. Now we will have Mr. Snyder, please.
I like air conditioning. I have it in my vehicles. Can't wait to get to them, but I don't have it in my house. Or other things like that, or small rooms, or rooms without windows are just not something that I would enjoy whatsoever. But it's a bigger picture. I think if we were going to study that, it should have much more information than what we have. Somebody may be uncomfortable for a couple of days, maybe so. Maybe there's something that could be done for that. I just don't think there's a simple answer to give to those kind of changes unless you just want to spend money on new buildings.
Thank you. We will now move to Brandon.
As I was getting prepared to run for school board, I sought out the opinions of students, teachers, parents, and when it comes to the category of building improvements, this is by far the number one topic that came up in those discussions. It is a difficult situation. It is an expensive undertaking, but I do think it should be a priority. Probably co-equal with the renovations at CW Longer. How fast we can do that and how we choose which buildings and how fast, that sort of thing, is probably another story. But I do think we should keep it as a high priority for the health of the students and also their ability to learn in that environment.
Thank you. We will now move to Ms. Konashiki.
I'm concerned about the environment in the classrooms. I've talked to some teachers about the situation, and it is very cost prohibitive to change the situation. Not that we shouldn't keep trying. I would like to see if we could do things better if we decentralize the way we do our budgeting to give teachers and building principals more control over the monies in their building instead of trying to do a top-down approach from the top of the school board. So that's an idea I'd like to explore.
Thank you. We will finish up with Lanna, please.
I think excessive heat in a classroom clearly has to be a priority just from a health standpoint. Unfortunately, it is a prohibitive cost to consider. I believe we've even had numbers on estimates on what it would cost to put central air conditioning in all of the buildings. Again, it's one of those nice to haves, wish we had it, probably can't right now. And so I think what the board and the administration is tasked to do is to come up with creative solutions on how to avoid that, how to deal with kids in classrooms, teachers in classrooms, what kind of environment. I believe, and I should probably know this, so maybe I shouldn't admit it, but I believe there was a policy put in place that does deal with heat in classrooms, and there are certain parameters that when met, something kicks in and it's the children and the students in that situation are taken care of. I do think it is something that we need to consider, and it is a priority. I'm just not certain that central air conditioning is a possibility right now.
Thank you. We will move on to our last category of taxes. Our first question is, due to the overall wealth comparative to other local communities, Hollidaysburg Area School District receives less state funding and is forced to rely more heavily on local taxes than any other Blair County district. How will you control tax increases while still ensuring a quality school district? We will start with Doug.
Oh, that's another great question. You know, I think we look at everything on a case-by-case basis. This is, you know, I think by design we saved this topic for last, right? Because it's sort of the hot button, as it always is when it comes to an election. Since, you know, we do have what some people view as a lopsided appropriation of funding, and sometimes it feels like we have to put more burden on the taxpayer, it's, you know, more imperative than ever that we really consider case by case every year when we hopefully come up with a balanced budget, how we can use the existing dollars to make what we have work, instead of always looking at raising taxes as an option.
Thank you. Tom?
Recently, the chamber had a piece in the paper where Joe Herr, the president of the chamber, pointed out that something I agree in. We're not going to tax our way out of this thing. When I first moved here, we had Conrail, you had Warnaco, SKF, you had multiple factories employing people and paying taxes into school districts. We've lost that. What I'm afraid of is that we start taking a regressive approach and start cutting back in programs in Hollidaysburg where we lose the reputation of the school district. If that happens, industries that want to relocate here, top industries that want to bring good people with good paying jobs, you're going to look at the school district and assess it. They're going to look at theater, sporting activities, all the quality of life in an area, and school district is paramount.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I'm in favor of living within our means, whatever that might mean. However, that has to happen. If we've been dealt a bad blow, as was mentioned with just recently there, of big businesses moving out of our area, we become a service area. You're going to be around the minimum wage or a little bit more in your basic payroll. A lot of the big industries just aren't there for the money. I'm not sure we can overstep that bound and just keep it pushing the people that are here that don't have that much to begin with.
Thank you. Brandon?
There's certainly many cost pressures. I think Doug said something very important. He said that we need to make existing dollars work. I have a background in continuous improvement techniques and have found creative ways to both reduce and control costs, and I think I can employ that being on the board. There's some good examples that we've employed at Hollidaysburg already. I'm happy to say that the Frankstown and the Foot of 10 roof projects were both completed without the district going into debt, and I think it's a good example of the ways that the district is using money appropriately, having a good plan, and working that plan.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
I recently spoke with a gentleman whose monthly pension, his pension he receives from the private sector was reduced by $1,000 a month. Think about that for a fixed income family, having the amount of money coming in go down by $1,000 a month. The school board is the last line of defense on behalf of the taxpayers in our district. Government bureaucracies will always want more. They will always want to expand. they will never have enough money. We just had the conversation about air conditioning. There will never be enough money, but we have to draw a line, and we've got to be vigilant in trying to control costs for our taxpayers.
Thank you. Lanna?
How do we control taxes? Do we want to control taxes? Are we willing to raise taxes? I think that's all the questions that are often raised at times of candidacy and election. Everyone running for candidacy is a taxpayer, so when taxes get raised, everyone is affected. Clearly, keeping taxes down and not having raises is what everybody ascribes to. It's what we try to get. It's what we're shooting for. However, to get the level of longstanding excellence that we've had within our district, to have the level of quality educators and educational programs, it sometimes takes spending. And I think to the point that several of these gentlemen have made, it takes evaluating. What are we currently spending? What could we be spending? Where do we need to spend and where do we need to cut? And I think it takes that to help protect taxpayers. And I believe we're all willing to do that.
Thank you. Tim?
Basically, I don't know a taxpayer, dead or alive, that wants their taxes raised. I'm just like Lana said, I'm a taxpayer too, and I don't want to see my taxes go up. And I agree with all the gentlemen here and Lana that before we ever consider raising taxes, we need to evaluate everything that we're doing. And I think the board that has done an excellent job over the years of maintaining the quality of education that we have without expenditures going over and above what we actually need.
Thank you. Our next question. Some candidates in today's forum support a back-to-basics approach to education, arguing that the Hollidaysburg Area School District should not spend tax dollars on any programs falling outside these basics approach. Do you agree or disagree with this narrowing of the district's educational mission? Please explain. We'll start with Tom.
Me?
Yes.
Everything should be facts-based. I'll just state that right there. But I'm going to jump off on a tangent here. None of us, 5 of us, are endorsed by Taxpayers Unite Blair County. You'll see yellow signs, you get a lot of mailings. You assume this Taxpayer Unite Blair County is some kind of civic-minded group that's looking out for your dollars. Taxpayer Unite Blair County is a PAC started and run by Mrs. Kanashiki for the sole purpose of running candidates for the Hollidaysburg School Board. Of course we're not endorsed. We've never been invited or interviewed by Taxpayer Unite Blair County because its sole purpose is to elect people that are recruited and endorsed by Mrs. Kanashiki.
Thank you. Next we'll have Mr. Snyder.
What was the question? I couldn't gather it from Tom's answer.
Some candidates in today's forum support a back-to-basics approach to education, arguing that the Hollidaysburg Area School District should not spend tax dollars on any programs falling outside this basics approach. Do you agree or disagree with this narrowing of the district's educational mission? Please explain.
I'm not sure what I think about that.
Okay. Next, we'll have Brandon.
The basics of education are important. There's no doubt. I think having the basic English, reading, math skills are all important. There's no doubt to that. But I've had the opportunity to serve on several groups related to economic development and workforce development in Blair County. And I can tell you that the needs of Blair County are changing rapidly, and our education system has to change rapidly with it, so that we're preparing students to be able to take the jobs that are going to be available to them when they graduate. It's not the same as whenever I went to school, just seems like a few years ago, that there's some basic things people need to know, and that's enough. I think we really need to prepare our students by having a breadth of curriculum. That's difficult when it comes to paying taxes because it requires that we have a breadth of classes, but also be friendly to our taxpayers and use their money wisely.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki.
I think you misunderstood the idea of back to basics. It doesn't mean back to basics to the exclusion of everything else. I mean, we certainly all value all the elements of education that our district engages in, and I don't know anybody who wants to cut music or athletics or any of those programs that so many of our children enjoy. But the point is that every student should graduate with a basic foundation of knowledge that we hopefully could agree upon if we would ever discuss it, but a basic foundation and proficiency and competency in math and communication skills. Those are skills that are going to do you well for your entire life, and regardless of what you do. So those should be our foundation, and we have to be competent in those.
Thank you. Lanna?
I am not in support of narrowing the district's support for going outside of back to basic. I believe back to basic is, as Lois says, the basic foundation of knowledge. I think the methods of teaching are changing, the way our teachers engage, what they present, how they present. It's no longer the basic setup of a teacher in the front lecturing, preaching to the rows of students in the classroom. It's changing, and I don't think that necessarily involves cost. I think it's creative ways of educating to get back to the basics of the fundamentals of education and knowledge that are necessary for our students. I don't think it necessarily costs to do that. So I am opposed to saying that I wouldn't spend for it.
Thank you. Next we'll have Tim.
I would agree with Lanna that I am not opposed to spending to enhance the different ways. Yes, the students need a basic set of fundamentals to go on to higher education or to the trades, whatever it may be. But we need to find ways to keep up with the changes in education, and I am not opposed to doing that.
Thank you. Next we'll move on to Doug.
As I've alluded to a couple times today already, I'm a firm believer that the future of education looks very different. I believe, the way that my grandchildren will learn won't look anything like the model that all of us grew up on and were educated by. And I think, we need to keep our eyes open and be looking forward to opportunities to embrace that as a district. In terms of the idea of a back to basic concept and curriculum, I think we already have some things in place that address the idea that every student has to meet certain standards. Things like Keystone exams, and all of these standardized tests that we're subject to on a regular basis. I think those things, that's kind of their sole purpose, to make sure that those things are happening. So I encourage us all to really think long and hard about what the future of education looks like.
Thank you. Our final question is, do you think the district can maintain status quo with taxes and yet continually improve our educational programs? If so, how is that possible? We will begin with Mr. Snyder, please.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure, of course. Do you think the district can maintain status quo with taxes and yet continually improve our educational programs? If so, how is that possible?
I'm going to have to pass. I couldn't hear it.
Do you think the district can maintain status quo with taxes and yet continually improve our educational programs? If so, how is that possible?
I think that anyone that tells you that definitively they're not going to raise taxes on the school board is fooling you. There are cost pressures that are going to require some level of tax increase. Every year, absolutely not. But over time, those tax pressures will become unbearable and will need to require some level of tax increase. I think we can find creative ways to reduce cost pressures and to reduce control costs. and I think we got, as the school board needs to be a major part of making that happen. But can we maintain status quo without raising taxes at all? I think that's probably unlikely for the in the long term.
Thank you. We will now move to Mrs. Kanashiki.
I've watched the school board in the past about 8 years and how they behaved with regard to the budget. The only strategy that has been used to control taxes has been selling assets. We don't have any assets that I'm aware of that are left to sell. If we do, somebody please let me know. There's no cash cow out there anymore to raise capital for the district. So I have never in 8 years seen one board member propose creative ways to reduce the budget and balance the budget at budget time. So I don't have the answer. If anybody tells you they're not going to raise taxes, I want to see how they're going to do that, because we passed a budget with a $1.5 million deficit recently, and that is going to be going on for as long as the eye can see.
Thank you. We will now move to Lanna, please.
Clearly maintaining the status quo with taxes and yet continually improving likely is not a long-term plan. I would have to disagree with Lois. The current board has done due diligence in finding ways to get the most from our budget. Every time there's a hire that is needed or recommended or proven for a classroom or for a program, the administration does take it upon themselves to figure out ways where they can find cost savings to cover that expense. So that effort is underway. It is not a willy-nilly, let's just sign off on the budget, and if we have to raise taxes, so be it. That is not the process that we go through currently at all. I think I agree with Lois in saying that anyone who says they're not going to raise taxes is not being truthful, because coming to the point where you have to make the decision of meeting the needs and having sufficient funds may require tax increase.
Thank you. We will now move to Tim.
I would agree that anyone who would say that they're running and not going to raise taxes is lying to you. As a board member, if I'm elected, I would be in the camp of Lanna, saying that, you know, we're going to work with administration to find every way we can to maintain the status quo and find ways to balance the budget or move things around however we need to meet those programs. And to add on to what Doug was saying, that may be it. As the future of education changes, that may be a different way that we're going to attack it. Who knows? Nobody knows what the future holds, but I will promise you that I will do everything I can to make sure that we maintain the high excellence that we have.
Thank you. We will now move to Doug, please.
I think one of the worst justifications in the world for doing anything is the idea or the notion that, well, that's the way we've always done it. Continuing on my, I guess, perhaps rant about the future of this thing that we call education, instead of thinking so much about, is it more taxes or, how do we, I think what we really need to do is take a hard look at reallocating the resources that we have available to us. Several folks up here have said, and I second the notion, we're all taxpayer friendly. All of us pay taxes. We don't want to take more money out of our own pockets either. But I think, as we look to the future and trying to keep this system and this district that we love so much continuing to thrive, we have to look at all possibilities.
Thank you. We will now move to Tom.
Yeah, we're starting with a $1.5 million deficit. In my understanding, we've started with deficits like that. We do that with every budget for years now. We start with numbers like that, and then different streams from the state start coming in. We don't end up with those numbers. We still may end up with deficit and have to look at, okay, how do we bridge these gaps? But those numbers usually don't stand. You're operating without knowing what's coming in from the state and a lot of other different streams. As Mrs. Kanashiki said, we were fortunate to have Allegheny 1 and the administration bill to be able to sell those things, and those things took care of us a little bit. But we have to be diligent in looking at the budget, and we have to be careful about spending people's money. But the costs will go up 10 years down the road.
Thank you. We will now begin our closing statements, starting with Brandon.
Okay, so once again, I'd just like to thank Mr. Rollins and his honors civics class for organizing and promoting this event. I think it's a great example of teaching in a creative way that promotes a real-world experience, and I just applaud the class and Mr. Rollins for that item there. If you look around town, my signs that are in yards throughout the district say "Stronger communities through education." The school district and the community go hand in hand. Reputation is built slowly, over time, and on multiple fronts, and Hollidaysburg has a very good reputation in the community, but it can be damaged very quickly. I love this community, and I want the opportunity to serve it, and I think that I can do well in this capacity. If you entrust me with your vote November 5th, I'll take that responsibility very seriously, and I will uphold the high standards of education and community that you shall expect from your elected leaders. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mrs. Kanashiki?
We recently completed a student exit survey of graduating seniors. I was very pleased to see that so many of our teachers mentioned by name as having made a great positive impact on our students' lives. Not all comments were positive. One of my goals is to expand these surveys to obtain more information that will help us make our schools better. I have some good news for students. Much of the quality of your education depends on you. It depends on the effort that you put into it. It's up to you to make sure that you get something important out of all your classes, not just one or two, not just the ones with the teachers you like, not just your best subjects. If you push and demand more from yourself, you will develop discipline, strength of character, and the knowledge that will help you succeed in a long, purposeful life. Pick an extracurricular activity in or out of school that you can find meaning in. Work at it to make a meaningful contribution and further develop your skills and knowledge. Reach out to adults who have experiences that you can learn from. Parents, I encourage you to be an advocate for your children. Work together with your teachers to make sure your kids do not fall behind. Do not despair if your kindergarten children are not at the same level as other 5-year-old children. Just love them and nurture them. They are on their own unique time frame. Carpe diem.
Thank you. Lanna, please.
I would like to start by thanking the administration, Mr. Rollins, and his honors civics students for making this forum possible today. Thank you also to each one of you who have sacrificed about 90 minutes of your weekend to come here to listen, to learn more about us, about who we are, what we stand for, and how suited we are to represent you on the Hollidaysburg Area School Board. There are 9 candidates running for 5 positions. Each of your votes will be instrumental in deciding who fills those 5 positions. Who you vote for matters. You've heard the questions that have been asked and you've heard the answers. Hopefully you're leaving here today feeling like you've learned something about each one of us. I respectfully ask that when you vote, you do so with intention. Vote for the candidates who you have confidence in, who you trust will accurately represent you, who have strong character, solid judgment, and common sense, who you believe will act, think, and vote in ways that align with what's in your best interest, the best interest of Hollidaysburg students, and the best interest of our community. 4 years ago, you elected me to the Hollidaysburg School Board. I would appreciate your vote on November 5th so that I can continue to represent you, to serve, and to assume the responsibility for another 4 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim?
I would also like to once again thank everyone who had a part in putting together today's forum, and especially want to applaud the students of Mr. Rollins' honors civics class. Excellent job, guys. Today you heard the point of view of 7 of the candidates running for your school board. And from where I'm sitting, I feel you heard very clearly where we stand and what principles guide us. I hope I was able to answer all the questions in a manner that shows how I would approach the office and with what my focus is, and most important, my principle of providing a well-rounded quality education for all the students of this district. All I can ask now is you please carefully consider what you heard today, and I would appreciate your vote on November 5th.
Thank you. Doug?
I would also like to thank everyone involved with today. I also want to give a nod to all the folks watching via YouTube. Hopefully that's been a positive experience as well. For me, it boils down to plain and simple what's best for our students and what's best for our community. I really believe that a healthy school district promotes a healthy community, and that's really what's at stake in this next election. It's been well said already, but hopefully today's forum, if nothing else, gave everyone a sense of the values of the people that are running for the school board. I really do believe, honestly, in my heart, that the future of this district, maybe more so than ever, is dependent upon this election. And so I encourage and implore everyone to consider taking the time on November 5th to come out and vote your conscience. Do what you think is right for the community. We have a lot at stake in terms of what's best for our children, our families, and this great community that we love in Hollidaysburg. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom?
The choice for school board director cannot be any clearer. Choose thoughtful and truly independent candidates or respond to fear generated by multiple mailings paid by the Political Action Committee set up by a professional politician. Some of my fellow candidates, like myself, have a background in education. If you're susceptible to being influenced by the costly mailings that you have received, you would conclude that we have conflicts of interest. If trading in my $65,000 a year job with a car allowance and Caribbean vacations for a $33,000 teaching position makes me conflicted, then I guess I am. I do not understand why people would run for school board who demonstrate disdain for those who choose the teaching profession. The five of us decided to run for school board without ever having a conversation with each other and formed our alliance after the primary race. We are independent thinkers who agree on the importance of research and serious deliberation before voting. Your other choice is a slate of candidates recruited and financially supported by a full-time professional politician. I ask you, do you truly believe that people vote independent of the person who recruited them and paid for their campaign? You decide who is truly conflicted and who will make decisions based on data that is a product of peer-reviewed research. I believe that we will.
Thank you. Mr. Snyder?
I think what you've seen today in this panel is rather remarkable. You can see that there are men and women who care, that have ideas, and want to see good end results. That's the way any leadership should function. That's the way any board should operate. It doesn't mean that we all agree on everything. We don't. But it does mean that you can have people of this quality, I exclude myself, that can make things happen, good things happen. I've learned something today from some of them, and each one of them. Something that makes me better prepared to do what I would like to do. I'm interested in a stronger tie with local schools and the VOTEC. I'd like to see our kids stay in the area, if possible. And I'd like to see Hollidaysburg High School and junior high and elementary schools and preschools continue to have the reputation. Hopefully expenses will drop as technology improves.
Thank you. Please give one more round of applause for all of our candidates that joined us for the forum today. If anyone in the audience would like to speak to the candidates, some of them have indicated that they will remain after this event. Please meet them in the auditorium lobby. Thank you.